Today we're going to be looking at the Uppababy Cruz V2, which just launched in February and which has gone through a number of major changes since its last iteration. We're big fans of Uppababy engineering for the most part, and the new Cruz is a significant improvement over its previous version. Why? Well, because in a nutshell, they've scrapped everything they had going on with the original model, other than the name, in favor of a new idea, to instead just make a mid-sized version of the Cruz's big brother, the Vista. Don't get me wrong, the original Cruz was decently engineered for its intended environment. It's just that with tiny wheels and no real suspension, that environment meant only the very smoothest of terrain, while what they've built now is something entirely different. Let's start off with some stats. The Uppababy Cruz clocks in at 11.5 kilos and folds down to 42 by 58 by 84 centimeters, with the seat attached. It can carry 22.6 kilos in the seat and 13.7 kilos in its underslung shopping basket. The Cruz V2's seat has grown in relation to the original Cruz, with a longer leg rest and seat back, as well as a deeper footrest, and a canopy that now has adjustable height, such that it can both give sun coverage to a younger child, as well as provide adequate space to accommodate a child closer to the end of his or her stroller years. When we're talking about which ages are appropriate for the Cruz V2, we recommend that you use a bassinet for the first 6 months, or if you tend not to be out with your stroller for long periods, then an attached car seat will also work. While the seat will be suitable for the majority of children up until the end of their stroller use, though as with most reversible seat models, it might start to get a little cramped between around 3.5 to 4 years of age, depending on the size of your child. As far as the rest of the market is concerned, I would say that the Cruz V2 seat is on the larger end, more in line with heavier Cadillac-type strollers than most competing mid-size models. In addition to the larger seat, Uppababy has also changed the canopy extension method from the UV protection flap, which tended to wear down in a pretty ugly manner, to the more industry standard method of zipping an extension into the back portion of the canopy. There have also been a number of smaller improvements made to the textiles, including an easier method for extending the harness as your child grows. When it comes to parent comfort, as a mechanics man, my favorite part about the new design is the improvements that have been made to the Cruz's driving abilities. We'll get more into this in a moment when we go over the mechanics of the model, but for now I'd just like to say that the Cruz V2 has become one of the most terrain-capable strollers of its size class on the current market, in stark contrast to the original version, which was so unsuspended that it sometimes seemed more like driving a shopping cart than an actual stroller. Though it's still not a full Cadillac-type stroller or a three-wheeler, the Cruz V2 is able to quite comfortably tackle rougher terrain like cobblestones and dirt roads and such, and is built sturdily enough to do this without sustaining much damage or wear. Though the Cruz V2 is a little heavier than the previous iteration, it actually folds down smaller, which is amazing given the larger seat and wheels. The fold is not accomplishable with one hand, but the combination of a rigid, reinforced design and intuitive mechanisms makes the process quite easy, and the model can be folded with the seat attached and will also stand when folded, with a pair of rubber bumpers on the handle to protect the leather. As far as other activation mechanisms go across the model, everything has been designed to be as user-friendly as possible, and in fact, I actually wish they would have held back on this in a couple of places due to the added complexity such efforts bring to the stroller's smaller mechanisms, but this is something we'll also cover in a moment. As a last note on parent comfort, the redesigned basket on the Cruz V2 is large and very accessible, another element brought over from the Vista, making it ideal for longer trips out, whether it be shopping or picnics in the park. Okay, let's move on to the mechanics then, looking at the Cruz V2 from top to bottom. Okay, we're going to start by having a look at the handle, the folding mechanism, and sort of the overall structure of the chassis, which, as I already said, bears a lot more resemblance to the Uppababy Vista than it does the original Cruz. There are a few small details in the mechanisms that have been taken from the original Cruz, but for the most part, the vast majority of the stroller is essentially a shrunken down version of the Vista. So when we're looking at that overall structure, then I would say that one of the most important parts is these suspension units here, which act as like support struts, and it's one of the reasons why the Cruz V2 has a lot better off-road capability than its previous iteration. When we're looking at the handle then, as well as the folding mechanism, we have two wire-based systems involved here. One for extending the height of the handle, where you press in this button here, and a little peg pops out here underneath, 3 different positions. And a second for the folding mechanism itself. Before I show you that, I just wanted to point out that even though it does use these sort of internally complex wire-based systems, Uppababy has a tendency to build all of their small connection points in a very sturdy fashion. So you're not going to wind up with the same sort of like internal braking and asymmetry problems that you would find on cheaper models. So that second wire-based system then has to do with the folding, and what happens is you pull up on these triggers and a wire is running down to a rectangular metal strut, and when it's locked, that metal strut is going to sit right atop this angled piece here on the other side. So this entire mechanism, this hinge and all, is built in metal. You have a few other sort of hinged areas which are plastic, and so even though it's the same color, don't be confused, this is all metal. And what I would worry about when I normally look at that sort of a locking mechanism is that top portion, that rectangular piece, would wear down against that angled piece. But what's kind of built cleverly here is that because that angled piece is on the bottom, as you're pushing the stroller, and you're like pushing down the handle, all of the weight and all of the like potential wear will not occur against that lower angled piece, because that rectangular piece is naturally being pushed up against this nice cocooning top arc of this hinge here, this metal hinge, which kind of is like a longevity sort of a thing. It's built so that that specific point is not going to wear down fast as you're going over bumps and stuff. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of a closer look at the lower rear frame then of the model. If you're at all familiar with the Vista, you'll notice that they've really brought over pretty much the entire design. From the Vista here, you have this curved crossbar which hides the brake system. The brake system is actually one of the things I would have rather that they kept more in the style of the original Cruise. I understand they would have had to have something that's a little bit more heavy duty, but the Vista brake system sometimes tends to have some problems because it is very complex, and it's complex in order to allow for that flip-flop friendly thing where you never have to push your foot up against the bottom of the pedal. It has like a wire and it has a lot of small moving parts inside. If you're careful with it, you deal with any problems right away. If there are any, it is openable, but it is very complex inside. Lubricated and stuff, then you tend not to have that many problems. But again, it's one of the few areas where I would have liked them to stick with something closer to the original setup. As far as suspension goes, they have changed the quality of the tires. The wheels are of course larger, which is nice for terrain and stuff, but most of your suspension is going to come from those suspended support struts here up above. As far as the wheels themselves and how they connect to the stroller are concerned, Uppababy has always done this quite well. So they have that locking washer sort of a setup. They don't have any of the locking mechanisms within the axle, which is one of the things that I really like. It's all contained inside here, and it's very simple and sturdy. They have a metal shaft in order to stick the axle inside. Holds it nice and sturdy. I've never really seen any sort of problems with the rear wheels in how they lock into the chassis itself. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of a closer look at the front end then. One of the things that's been improved is of course the size of the front wheels, which is one of the reasons why it's going to function a lot better off-road. There's a bit of suspension built into the fork. When it comes to the swivel locks, they've gone with the Vista swivel lock, which is like, again, flip-flop friendly sort of an idea. So you're pressing in from the top, and there's even an indicator at this point in order to show when it's locked and unlocked. This is one of the areas that actually had trouble on the Vista, because what happens is when you get grit and stuff inside that top button, sometimes that button isn't going to press down or pop back up, and you can have trouble with the swivel lock. So I would have preferred a simpler swivel lock. It's another one of those areas where I would have rather they didn't take something over from the Vista, but oh well. It does seem to be redesigned a little bit in relation to the older models of the Vista, so hopefully everything is a little bit tighter together and you won't see that many problems with it. When it comes to wobble protection on this model, it absolutely excels. So wobble protection has to do with that over time, that axle, as it runs inside the housing, is going to wear down horizontally the inside of that shaft, causing the front wheel fork to be a bit loose, which would mean that as you go a little bit faster, the front wheels would have a tendency to wobble. And that is actually a problem that occurred with the original Cruise quite a bit, and they've really overcompensated for that this time. So I'm going to just explain that. Remove the wheel. There are actually 4 things working against wear by the axle inside the frontal housing. So firstly, you have 2 points of connection here. It's going to lock in the middle, but you'll also have a raised disc here on the top of the fork, like a raised circumference, and that's going to give 2 points at which this wheel is going to press against the sides, so that it keeps it from simply being able to put too much pressure on the top part of that axle inside that housing. 2 additional things though. There was a little bit of wobble protection on the original Cruise, even though it didn't function super well over time because it would wear down. And that are these little plastic pegs here, which press down and give sort of a little bit of a spring-loaded effect against the top of the fork. So they've retained those. And they've also added in the wobble protection system that they had on the Vista, and it looks a little bit larger even than what they had on the original Vista, which is that inside where that axle pushes in is an additional spring-loaded plastic piece that presses in against that axle, which just kind of dampens the effect of that axle as it moves horizontally. So all of that is really good, and I really doubt that you will see those sort of wobble problems related to the axle damaging the inside of the housing on this model. So, should you get the new Uppababy Cruz V2? My thoughts on that are probably clear by now, but yes, absolutely. In fact, looking at this model in comparison to the previous version, I sort of feel like Uppababy finally figured out what they wanted to do with the Cruz, as I'd always found it a little hard to define the correct lifestyle conditions for the original version. The Cruz V2, by contrast, is a very solid mid-sized model that blows most other mid-sized models out of the water for sturdiness, longevity, and drivability. It will work great for you if you want a lot of the qualities one finds in a Cadillac stroller, a larger seat and basket, and the ability to tackle a little bit of rougher terrain when you need it to, but need something that will fit a bit better in the trunk of a medium-sized car. It's an exciting time for mid-sized four-wheel swivel wheel models, as the higher end of the market is starting to shift a bit away from the more fragile show model type designs. Strollers like the Bugaboo Chameleon, Cybex Preem, and Stock Explorer, towards more of an emphasis on performance. In any case, we hope that you found this video interesting, and if you did, we ask that you subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. Thank you.